Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 29 of the Making Noise podcast. My name is Adam Kuntz. I am your host. Today's episode features harpist Danielle Kuntz. Danielle is a new music harpist, and she is also a member of the Blank Experiment. Danielle is a specialist in collaborating with composers, and she offers consultations to help composers learn to effectively write for the harp beyond what you would learn in your orchestration books. You know, we learn the notes, we learn the range, some of the possibilities, but that's where Danielle comes in. She really helps composers understand what is required in order to make these notes sound on the instrument. And because of that, that's led to our conversation today, which focuses on this amazing online workshop that she's offering called the Toolbox Sessions. This takes place between May 19th to the 21st, which is 11 days away. No, 9 days away. Whew, I can't do math. So you're definitely going to want to sign up for that ASAP. It has a list of amazing presenters. Instruments include bassoon, clarinet, guitar, harp, oboe, percussion, piano, saxophone, trumpet, violin, voice. There's some amazing people on here who are doing presentations on those instruments, some of which include previous guests of the Making Noise podcast, like Lisa Nair and Marianne Parker. It's also a great networking opportunity. These are people who work extensively in new music and collaborating with composers, so they're exceptional with being able to communicate how to effectively write for their instruments, once again beyond what you'll find in your orchestration books, some of the practicality things. I could say as a guitarist, there's a lot of things that composers miss or don't recognize, or maybe a little bit too afraid to try. So this is going to be a really great thing. I will be in attendance, and because Danielle is so kind, she's offering a 10% or $10 discount to anyone who registers using the code Making Noise 22. That's MAKINGNOISE 22. So if you use that when you sign up for the Toolbox Sessions, you'll get a $10 discount. And two other things I want to mention before we get to the conversation. Midway through, for those who are watching, you'll see this, but those who are listening, it won't sound any different. The Zoom 40-minute notification came up. I was unaware that this was a thing, and so Danielle was so kind for us to switch over to her account, and that happens midway through the conversation. And then the other thing is that for the next few months, I will be on a hiatus, so this will be the last episode for the foreseeable future, but I do promise I will be back, and we will be having more fun, interesting, and unfiltered conversations. So with all that said, let's make some noise. My name is Adam Kuntz, and I am a collaborative composer. Join me in the search for a career in classical music. This is the Making Noise podcast. Thanks a lot for being flexible and working, making this work.
Well, happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone who listens to this, we Danielle and I had tried once before to have a conversation. We had the conversation.
We didn't.
Yeah. And then there were some serious technical difficulties that could not be fixed in post-production. So here we are. Round 2, but still round 1 for the audience.
Using the cheap mic on my end, which is at least reliable, unlike an air quotes fancy microphone.
So crazy. That's still amazing. I mean, there's so many variables, right? There's so many variables with this stuff. But that's part of what we do. We adapt. We have to be flexible in the moment, and going on stage and it's like, oh, you actually only have 45 minutes. You don't have a full hour to perform, so you have to remove some pieces, and then you're like, okay, shit.
What do I want to cut?
Yeah. But Danielle, I had a realization is I'm pretty sure you're the first harpist on the Making Noise podcast.
Yeah.
I think so. which is so cool. You're the only harpist so far that I've had a conversation with. But that's so part of why you're here is sort of the harp, but like there's more to it. So can you talk a little bit about what it is that you do and your primary reason for being here today, the primary reason for having this conversation?
Right. So I know that you're a composer. A lot of the guests that you have had on in the past are composers. I'm not a composer, but I primarily work with composers. So I call myself a new music harpist. Basically, my goal is to get new music performed. Ideally, music by composers who are still living, which is even better, and just like foster that collaboration between performers and composers, and just lower some of the barriers that have been built up over the years. So for harp specifically, I feel like there's just been a lot of, I don't know, a harp is a confusing instrument to write for. I will admit that, but I think harpists have made it even more intimidating. So harpists will get music from composers and we're like, oh, this isn't playable. This is awful. They didn't think about the pedals. They didn't think about anything. And that's what comes across in their interactions, not, oh, let's try to make this better. Here's some tips. Here's some of this. So harpists are annoyed. Composers feel like they're never going to figure it out. And there's been this divide, and I really want to break that down. So this will get into the backstory. When I was a student, most of my friends were composers. So I kind of got into new music a little bit more naturally because my friends wrote music for me. I wanted to play it, and that's really how it started. And then realized, it's a lot more, it's just so much more rewarding to play music by people I know, people I can actually collaborate with, be part of that creative collaboration process. And that's something that, we also do with my ensemble, the Blank Experiment, with, our mission is to just get new music performed. And we have a very weird instrumentation of, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, saxophone, and harp. Like there's no music out there for our specific instrumentation. So when we had formed originally, it was just clarinet, saxophone, and harp, which again, there's not rep out there for that. So the group formed because it was a group of friends who wanted to play together, and they just asked their friends who were composers to write music for them. And that's really just, we've kept going like that. People see us, they write music for us, we play it, and we do it again. So it's been an incredible group to be a part of.
There's the background where you said how you got into new music through collaborating with your who are your friends, right? Mm-hmm. Like people who you spend time with, you just naturally end up like there's like this natural sort of collaboration that takes place because just by virtue of spending so much time together. So mm-hmm. I think that it's cool to hear that because it's almost like from day one you were, I don't want to say born, but like you came into classical music to perform new music,
I feel like that's, yeah. I fought it for a while. Not fought it. I thought it was a side thing. I thought I still was going to do the, primary, harpist career where you do all the auditions, you try to win an orchestra job, try to get a teaching position, and until then you teach kids and you play for weddings. Like, mm-hmm. That's the harpist career. Mm-hmm. And I always thought, okay, that's what I have to do. I'll do new music too because it's fun, it's unique, it's something that not every harpist does, but in order to be legitimate, I need to keep going this route. And I got burned out so fast because you can't do anything. And then the motivation wasn't really there to keep playing the standard rep when it was just so much more rewarding to play the new music. Because, the world doesn't need another 10 recordings of, the Foray Impromptu or the WC dances. Like, they're great pieces of music, but there's so many good recordings out there. We don't need more. Mm-hmm. But we have all this new harp music that hasn't been recorded yet or performed. Why not do that?
Absolutely. That's such a it's such a big thing to think about. I mean, because in music school we're so steeped in the tradition of it.
Hmm.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, all things have some sort of tradition and stem out of somewhere, but especially for someone like you, and I know like me, like when I was playing guitar, when I was playing classical guitar, I had a similar sort of experience. I didn't want to play the 19th century rep. I will say that I don't think that my foundations as a classical guitarist are strong, like the fundamentals.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's necessarily because I didn't go through those early stages or whatever you want to call it, or that traditional route of playing the canon. But I was very much like you, which is probably why I'm a composer. I didn't want to play any of the music, that was just like 1/4, 1/5 chord progressions, and so it's fascinating to hear with performers, especially how they came into new music, and
Right.
now you're in the blank experiment, and as you said, it's like a really eclectic ensemble or instrumentation at least.
Well, I mean, we're kind of weird people too. It's
I think it's a necessity in some ways. Yeah. So you had this experience with your friends in undergrad that kind of leaned you into new music. I'm curious, what were your early experiences like, if you could recollect collaborating with composers, or maybe even like
yeah.
thinking about it, where you were then and where you are now? I know it's a very different. There's a long time between then and now, but it's just
It's been a while. It's
yeah,
been a
yeah,
few years.
sure.
I think I didn't know how to start. I just kind of got thrown into it. And that's something I would love to see become more systematic for performers, is learning the language of new music essentially, which isn't really its own genre because it's there's so many variations and styles within like the new music categorization, but we get so used to our own, the standard rep. We're trained how to do, all our scales, all the runs, all the regular chord progressions, things like that. But once you get into new music, it's a different kind of complexity. Instead of, the most challenging feature being this fast 16th note passage, it's polyrhythms and extended techniques. And, you know, if you're not writing in a tonal manner, sometimes as a tonally trained classical musician, you get thrown into this music like, I don't know what note is right, what note is not. No one's going to tell if I miss a note because
Yeah.
it all sounds, and like you have to learn how to train your ear to get used to the dissonance, learn how to count rhythms, learn practice strategies when you can't practice with a metronome because everything's changing so much. You don't have a consistent beat to be able to just like turn on the metronome and just play this passage 100 times until you get it right. Like it doesn't work that way. So when you make that shift from standard rep into new rep, there's so many differences, and I would love to see that gap bridged a little bit more. So be able to have a freshman play something that has some familiar elements, but adds in two new types of things. Maybe have some asymmetrical meters and things like that, where you're not just doing it all at once. My first experience with actually, the asymmetrical meters, like the 5/8, 7/8, it was in a wind ensemble. So it wasn't even solo. Like I had to have it all right. There were a lot of pedals in the piece, like chromaticism. It was just like, it was a mess. It was a crazy mess. Like I had never learned how to count asymmetrical meters. And maybe that's also as a harpist and doing primarily older rep versus, maybe someone who was, a brass player and plays in wind symphony all the time, and their rep is written a little bit later. So you do get more of that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, there's a high barrier of entry for performers to get into new music, and I'd like to see that bridged a little bit more. I know that didn't completely answer your question.
No, no, no,
But
no. It's
I
definitely
do have plenty of stories.
sure, sure. No, I mean, It is something that I've heard a lot about, especially like I've written a lot for saxophone, and I've heard often from saxophonists that when they're trying to teach their younger students, like, late high school, early college students, trying to introduce them to more extended techniques and stuff, a lot of the repertoire that is written that might introduce like a multiphonic or something, it's either like really like what's the word, like just not enjoyable music,
Yeah.
or it's way too hard. And there's no like
There's nothing in between.
there's no solid middle ground where it's like, okay, here's an approachable way to play a few multiphonics, and at the same time it's not like completely overwhelming to the point where
Every note's a multiphonic.
yeah, and then you're inside of a quintuplet, whatever. So I mean, so what you're saying is resonating quite a bit, or I should say, I've definitely heard that before. I think there's something with us composers, especially when we start getting to extended techniques, that we want to explore like the sound or what is possible with the sound, and then that just suddenly like goes into some other deep direction of like where tonality is over here and like everyone else is over there.
Well, I mean, there's definitely room and there's that need to explore.
Yeah.
And have that, I guess if you're thinking about it in, academic terms, have your lab where you're just experimenting and trying out things and doing stuff. But then if you want to get it performed by people who aren't only the specialists in new music and get a wider audience, then it needs to be refined a little bit more.
That's very true. Yeah, there has to be some sort of middle ground there, or marrying of the craft and what, I guess, the not accessibility of what it sounds like, but of the playability. And that's definitely something that I battle with what I write, and it makes me think. This is another thing I don't want to get too far off, because we definitely are going to talk about Toolbox Sessions.
Oh yeah.
But you have such a phenomenal social media presence, and one of your recent posts, I think it was like yesterday or something, was about this sort of topic. Like it was talking about what was it exactly? It might have been this exact thing, right? Wasn't it about having for performers to, oh man, now I'm forgetting what it was.
I think it was along these. I'm in that stage of life where I have to write my posts in 10 minutes or they don't happen. So I don't always remember afterward.
But it was a great post though. It was oh man, I'm totally blanking on what it was. It was something along the lines of what we're talking about, like writing music or performers approaching new music, or
making it more accessible for performers to get involved with new music.
Yeah.
So like if your first piece is a barrio sequenza, you're going to leave that experience. Maybe you had a good performance, but there would have been so much work that went into that. It would be like, if you wanted to learn how to run, if you wanted to start running marathons and your first one was, a full marathon before you even learned how to run a 5K. Like,
right. Yeah.
You're going to be like, yeah, I did it and I'm dead and I'm trash and I never want to run again in my life. Versus, if your first run is a half-mile run, you finish it feeling good and like you could have gone a lot longer, but you finish it, it's done, and you had a good experience. And that's kind of the way I think performers need to be able to get started with new music in a way that's manageable, achievable. They can have a good experience from the beginning and then keep growing and building. Instead of, just getting thrown in the deep end and like, well, if you can't figure out these crazy polyrhythms, sure, go back to Mozart.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's an instance where, coming back to our conversation, the performer could approach a composer, hey, could you write a piece for me that does X, Y, and Z, but within these limitations,
And it's something where like educators also need to be in this conversation to start incorporating this music into their, pedagogy and their, sequences of repertoire that they have students studying. and be like, okay, well, we usually want to introduce things in this order. How can we fit in, some new things, new concepts into these
Mm-hmm.
strategies?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's that's a really important thing. It's in the early years too. I think it's one of the challenges is understanding exactly what the career trajectory is supposed to be, but it doesn't matter because the more tools you're provided with, Toolbox Sessions, the more tools you're provided with, then the the more I'm very incoherent today apparently.
Oh, same here.
You're able to be more varied with your craft or your career.
Right. And I'm also very much an advocate for new music. So if we can get all the people that are stuck in classical music into being stuck in new music,
Hmm.
it's not going to be the end of the world.
Not at all, no. And both things. I
Because
mean,
we need to support the music that's actually being created
yeah,
today. That's relevant to us instead of 19th century music isn't really our music in the same way.
absolutely. It's a very very different. Just the time period alone is already enough
Different
to say it's
culture,
like
different context, different everything. And like
exactly.
it doesn't mean it's not good music. It's good music, but it's also we need music that's relevant for us. And maybe the extreme experimental music isn't that either,
Hmm.
but it's experimental. It's innovating, it's trying new things, it's experimenting, but then bringing that into more of a coherent, getting performers involved. You have to play the music to actually understand it, hear it, and let it infiltrate,
Hmm.
what we're used to hearing. So it just has
Yeah,
to be played.
going back to what we were saying earlier, like trying to find a middle ground, where all of these things can exist. It's like there's the music that does extreme things. There's like 19th century and before music, and then there's the music that kind of falls within the middle of all of that, that
Mm.
is representative of sort of a way in, you know.
Yeah, and something I talk about a lot also is you don't have to like everything. Like there's so much variety in new music. There's so many composers out there,
Mm-hmm.
all writing very diverse music. You don't have to like everything, but I guarantee like there's going to be music out there for everyone. So find a living composer who writes music that you love.
Mm-hmm.
Play it. Be their super fan. Just like there's so much variety. Like everyone's gonna find something. And maybe you dig the super experimental music. Like I think it's cool. But I also know not a very audience I um have, for all my performances that may not be the type of music that they're there to hear. So I try to, think strategically about programming and putting things in order that makes coherent sense to them, and instead of going, okay, here's Mozart, and then we're going to throw in a new piece that's totally another extreme, and there's no way that they have any context to think through that. So audiences are smarter than we realize as long as we, think about how we share the music with them. But, not everyone has to like everything. That's okay. But
I
just because
love
you don't
that.
like one piece of music doesn't mean you don't like any music being written today and you have to go back to Mozart and Beethoven.
It's so true. I love that so much. I mean, it's so, I know the Beatles, for example. I think the Beatles is one of those bands. Most people like them. A lot, there are people who hate them,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that they have such a diverse repertoire that there's got to be a song in there somewhere that everyone would like in some way.
Right.
But and the same thing with new music. And that's the thing is like new music is sort of like an umbrella term. It's just like music that's being written but today. I love that approach. It's the openness. Like you have to have that open mind. I often say to people who are uninitiated to new music is when you're listening to it, close your eyes and don't expect anything specific. Don't go in with any sort of expectations and allow the music to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And when things, you hear something, it goes off, whatever, sort of follow that and see what comes next. But don't go in there, it's a challenge when you have this conversation with people and they say like, oh, this band, they're kind of like bluesy, kind of jazzy, and then you listen to it and you're like, this is neither of those things. you know? It's like so if you say to someone, oh, we're gonna go see an orchestra perform today, and they're like, oh, orchestra, Beethoven, Mozart, I got it, and then they get there and it's like Fairney-Ho and Ligeti, and they're like, this isn't Beethoven. So so that openness, that open-mindedness is it sounds to me like you're saying is crucial.
Right. And also, context is important. So there's music that's not written to be feel good, happy music. And I think that's what we associate with classical music, because in comparison to what it used to be, like there was dark classical music, but when we hear it, just because we associate like, tonality with, predictability, it doesn't hit us quite in the same way it probably hit the original audience. Like there's some dark Mozart, but we don't listen to Mozart and think, oh, that's dark.
Yeah.
Even so, I think just kind of thinking through the context. So not all music. So if you're thinking about like film scores, there's a lot of music that you hear in a film score. If you heard it in a concert hall, you'd be like, ooh, that's really edgy and weird sounding. But then it makes total sense, in setting the stage for, the film score. And it's kind of interesting just to hear things in different contexts and realize, okay, you do actually hear a lot of contemporary music. You just don't realize it.
That's such a good point. Yeah. That is so true. I mean, yeah, if you remove the visual element of film and only listens to the soundtrack or the film score or anything, it would be exactly that.
But it's the film that makes it tangible for the audience. So maybe we could start to incorporate some more of those things for audiences. So instead of sitting them in a dark room in their hard little chair saying, listen to Ligeti, give them something tangible to help make sense of this music. Whether it's visual element or I don't know, I'm brainstorming too, but thinking about how can we make our music more tangible.
Making it a little bit more immersive, adding other elements outside of just the sound and then seeing people on stage. That's right. Something that I've thought a lot about the last couple of years, and I think it's a really fascinating and important thing, like you're saying. I mean,
and I'm not a producer in the same way. I'd love to, but there's a time limit on everything right now. But I'd love to like collaborate with people, to be able to create these experiences.
Right.
What I at least try to do is at least try to talk to the audience, just to tell them a little bit about the music I'm playing, give them a little bit of context. And that goes a long way, even just doing that. And it also just helps, create that connection with the audience. Because if they like you, they're more likely to like your music. Same way, I didn't start getting into new music because I loved the music. I got into it because the composers were my friends. I wanted to support them. And as I started to do it more, I realized this is cool. This is awesome. I'm into this. But it was those relationships that really got me started.
The more we go into this conversation, Danielle, the more I'm hearing the collaborative nature of how you do things. Like talking to the audience, getting to know them, talking a little bit about the piece, providing all these ways to experience the music. It's so evident that for you, collaboration is a really big part of the process, which is the Toolbox Sessions.
Yeah.
Right. This is a really cool thing. I was really excited when you emailed me about it. Can you talk about the Toolbox Sessions, what it's all about, how it came about? I think would be really fascinating.
Yeah. So like kind of the thing I've been mentioning over this conversation is I want to be able to connect performers and composers together. So like rewinding back to when I was in grad school, one of my music business proposals was to create a database to connect, performers and composers together. And my professor said, I don't think that's going to be viable. Like, how is that going to pay for itself? But Toolbox Sessions actually kind of goes along that same inspiration, but I think it will actually work. So what we're doing is I've brought together 12 experienced collaborative musicians, and these are people who work with composers, they're involved in new music, they have that experience, and we'll all be talking about specifically how to write for our instruments, just to give composers a good context for the capabilities of our instruments, what things work well, what things you need to be careful about. Because I know you've all taken instrumentation, orchestration classes, which are great, but there's just like so much information that you get in that time period. I took those classes too, just as a music theory major, and I taught the class on harp, and I was an undergrad. I didn't know what I was teaching. I was like, this is what the harp is. But like, as I've, gone through and I've worked with tons of composers, I've developed a framework on like how to teach writing for a harp in a way that, is systematic. It gives you that framework to be able to then make sense of all the crazy extra information that you have to try to figure out. So just like having that framework, and that's what all the presenters are going to be doing. So we have Lisa and Neer talking about text setting for voice. So if you're writing for voice, there's a lot more than just the notes that you're writing and the rhythms, but thinking about the text itself and the actual sounds you're making and how that fits with the pitches. And I'm not a vocalist, so that's something that you have to think about as the composer. And so she'll be going through that. We have trumpet player, violinist, guitarist. I know a lot of people ask about writing for guitar. And then plus all the members of the Blank Experiment will be there. So if you're planning to write for the Blank Experiment, you should come, because we'll give you the lowdown on how to write for our instruments. But yeah, this is something I'm super excited about, this just to help foster more collaboration between performers and composers. I need to do a lot of work on the performers just to get them open to it, but a big barrier is that they get music that isn't playable. And if you're someone who does not have experience in new music to start with, that's a huge barrier. So if a composer can write something that is at least playable at a basic level that you can then improve on, that's going to really help foster that collaboration. So from the composer side, that's kind of the action step, and then performers just need to be open to it. So I'm working on that, but yeah, no, I'm super, super excited about this, and it's a great group of people.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, as you know, Lisa Nair was on the podcast before, and there is an actual I don't know, language of communicating how to write for instruments, or how to like the language of collaboration in a way. Mm-hmm. How to talk about these things from a performer's perspective and a composer's perspective, and it seems like that's exactly one of the big separation between what you're offering and what like the Samuel Adler Study of Orchestration book does. Mm-hmm.
That's because the books are giving you the rules. Mm-hmm. So this is the range, stay within the range. This is the clef that instrument uses. Here's a list of extended techniques that they'll do. Mm-hmm. But there's so much nuance that you have to think about. So when I'm working with composers, I don't usually say things are impossible. I'll say, this is going to be difficult. Is this what you want? Is there a way that we can tweak this? Or what are you trying to achieve? Because a lot of things are possible, but you have to think about, the context and how do you want to optimize it, and balancing. So you don't want to have the entire piece be wickedly difficult. But you can also, if there's something that you want, you can pick and choose and think through strategies, and things that work in one context may not work in another. So there's a lot of, there's just a lot that you have to think about. So the guidelines, not hard and fast rules, and the rules that you can break, but you have to know the basics and the boundaries before you can actually push those boundaries. Ooh. Instead of just like, bulldozing through them, be like, oh, why do people think that this music isn't playable? I thought it's fine. Right. But you can intentionally, with intention, challenge the playability.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like I know Ava, who is the oboist in the Blank Experiment. Um, Ava talks a lot about how in every orchestration book you look at, when it comes to the dynamic range of the oboe, like the
Hmm.
first fifth from like what is it, B flat three all the way up to F4,
Hmm.
like you, or maybe E4, you can't get quieter than like mezzo forte, and composers constantly try to put a quieter dynamic like piano or double P or whatever,
Yeah.
and she's like this isn't possible. Like it's so hard. So that's what you mean, right? Talking about like the
Right. So it's like,
foundations and
actually understanding the nuances. Because, like, you all know the ranges. You have the guides in the books to reference that, and that's helpful. But just like actually being able to talk with an experienced collaborative musician who knows, what kinds of things to watch out for, what kinds of things do composers think are really difficult, but actually are not. I know Katie Moritz, the violinist, we were talking the other day, and she was saying, composers are terrified about double stops, but a lot of them really aren't that bad. They're in the standard rep. People play them all the time. People know how to do them. Um, she's like, I want composers to be less scared about that stuff too. Um,
right.
and I know for harp, the textbooks all talk about the range. They talk about the pedals. They talk about glissandos and some extended techniques. That's like not most of the unplayable music I get has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with the shape of the hands, the action of playing the harp. Um, okay, the textbooks will mention we don't use our fifth finger, but thinking about, okay, it's really difficult to reach a large interval between our third and fourth fingers just because there's so little finger independence. Most people cannot stretch that far. But I still get music all the time that has huge intervals on the bottom of the chord that just really doesn't work. Um, that's the kind of thing that composers need to know, not necessarily um, pedals. Although I do think composers should know about the pedals, but the textbooks go through all of that as well. And most of the time, when I get something unplayable, it's not because of impossible pedals; it's because stuff literally doesn't fit the hands. So
So
that's the foundation of what I teach.
it's like a practicality problem.
Right. A shape of the hands kind of thing. There's so much, like, I could talk for hours about harp writing issues.
Yeah.
Most of the standard rep harpists all say, oh, just go study harp music to learn how to write for the harp. Um, for the harp specifically, that's not extremely helpful because the harp has changed so much over the last 2 decades, or not last 2 centuries. It used to be a much smaller instrument. Strings were lighter tension. They were closer together. So a lot of the music that was written in that time was written for that harp. But the modern harp, has far more tension. Strings are further together. It's just a different instrument. So if you're trying to write like you did for, the 19th century harp, it's not going to work so well on our instrument. On the flip side, we have a lot more capabilities with the harp. Like, you don't have to be worried as much about the harp not being heard. You don't need to have 6 harps like Wagner did to make sure that the harp is heard. But you have other challenges. So just understanding the actual modern harp rather than just studying all the scores on IMSLP from the 20th century, 19th century.
I'm glad you brought up that point because that's actually been something that I find to be a little bit of a challenge. Where if I'm writing for an instrument and if I go to look at the rep, it doesn't exactly, because I think it's just the way that I think about playing the instrument. Seeing the notes on the page doesn't tell you the physicality of what goes into playing the instrument.
Right.
I do that as if I'm playing the violin. So that's where I like I can see the notes. Okay, I know these notes are possible in this order, or like your friend who said double stops on the violin. Okay, I can see these are possible. I don't know how far apart the fingers are when they do those double stops. Like if I were to ask them to offset it, like flatten one of the notes so that the interval becomes wider, like what does that do to the finger position?
Yeah, on the
Or
violin might not be as big of a deal. On the double bass,
Right.
huge.
Right, exactly. Or like trying to throw in like a quarter tone or something in there. Like, what if you did that? Like, is that practical? If you're on the violin and you're all the way up high, is a quarter tone a practical note to try to introduce, or is the distance so like the finger moves to the smallest amount that like it's negligible?
You do the vibrato and you're already going.
Exactly. Yeah.
Vibrato.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the things that have always challenged me.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff that you have to talk to a collaborative musician who understands those things and can think of that context instead of, cut and paste thinking, because, context is important. And that's a big thing that I talk about with extended techniques. There's a lot of things that are possible in isolation that may not work in context of the piece. You have to think about the larger context. Like, what are the hands going to be doing? Is there time for the hands to move to do this? Do you have enough hands at this point? Some techniques use 2 hands, and you have to remember that, or jumping ranges. A jump in one context might not work in another, depending on, what the pedals are doing, what your hands are doing, everything else, what instruments you're doubling in an orchestra. Just like, there's so many variables. There's so much for you guys to remember. Let us help you. Come alongside and help you, support you, partner with you.
I love that. I always, one of the things I've probably said this on the podcast before, but often when I'm collaborating with a performer, I'll say to them, talk to me about your instrument as if I'm 5 and I know nothing about it, so that I can like gather how that person thinks about the instrument, and I can also get like a crash course as if they were teaching a beginner, which I am.
Right.
Like if I were to sit down with you and be like, hey, Danielle, I'm gonna write this piece for you. Talk to me as if I don't know anything about the harp, because I literally don't. I've always thought of the harp as like a driving manual transmission, because you're pushing in all the pedals and stuff, and your hands are doing things, and so it's like shifting the gears and steering.
I have to methodically plan it all out. It's crazy, but there's also a lot that's possible. So I feel like composers kind of fall into one of 2 categories. Either they don't have any idea of the limitations, they just write anything, and then the performers get it and they're terrified. Or the composer starts out terrified and just has, just is scared to really push the boundaries at all, because you don't know where they are. And I don't want you to have to deal with either of those. I want you to be able to write with intention, know that your music is playable, know what questions to ask, instead of, asking a musician who may not know how to help, know, specifically what kinds of questions to ask. Is this interval playable? Does this pedal change work? Or is this a better option? Because then even musicians who are not specifically trained in collaboration will probably be able to answer those types of questions versus maybe it's playable, I don't know, I can try to play through it, kinds of things. So specific questions will always get, more specific answers.
That's very true, because then there could be a veil of uncertainty when primed in that way, where like if you ask them, like the example you just gave, where like, I don't know, maybe it's possible. As a composer, I would hear that and think like, maybe they don't want to do it then.
Yeah.
Or like, okay, maybe I shouldn't write that in there. And kind of, that's obviously like a self-conscious thing, but it goes to like, what we're talking about, like having that sort of communication and being able to effectively ask what it is that you're looking for, and as the performer too, to be able to relay what is needed, and also have that I guess explorative or experimental sort of like approach to it. Because earlier you said you don't like to say things are impossible, and in my mind that implies that you're open to being like, well, let me see how this works,
Right, or let's find a solution.
Right.
Because a lot of times, as classically trained musicians, we assume that notes on the page are absolutes. Something I realized, from the early days of working with composers, is that there's a lot more flexibility and composers are, they're not married to the specific notes that they chose. Sometimes they are, and that's fine. We'll work around that. But, you know, there's so many times I was like, I don't know, I can maybe make this work. And the composer's like, we can switch a couple of notes. That's fine. We switched 2 notes in the section that was killing me. Works great. It's just like those little tweaks. And I don't know, it's sometimes the coolest thing. And to be part of that process is, I don't know, I love it. I'm really honored by the composers who let me be part of that process.
That excites me. That excites me just to hear that, because I feel the same way when I get to work with people who are so invested in the process and working together. And then by the end of that whole session of collaborating, you're like, wow, I feel so motivated and like optimistic about what we're doing here. This is fantastic. It's an exciting thing. I have a question about the Toolbox Sessions. You talked about what it's the reason behind it and what it's gonna, what the content is gonna be, more or less. Can you talk about what the actual experience is gonna be, because it's virtual, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we decided to make it virtual just to make it easily accessible to everyone. Partly because all the performers, musicians who are presenting at the workshop, we're all from all over. There's some of us, on the East Coast, Midwest, West Coast, all over. So, and then we just want to be able to reach composers as well. So it will be a virtual format. We'll be hosting, it'll be about 3 presentations a day with a panel discussion afterwards. So, and we have different panel topics. We'll be talking about our experience running, consortiums, because a lot of us have collaborated with composers for consortiums. Talk about that. The Blank Experiment will be talking about, running a new music ensemble, what our collaboration process is like with the composers we work out, some of the ins and outs of just running a new music ensemble, especially with all of us, across the country for much of the year. So it will be a virtual format, but there will be time with each of the sessions, to be able to ask questions. And then we'll also have, probably a Discord server for people to interact and talk and things like that. So, and then it will all be recorded, so the people that get the VIP access will be able to access the recordings. And you'll probably want that, even if you can join everything live, to be able to reference, these workshops and presentations at a later time.
That is incredibly beneficial to have, especially like you said before, if it's a composer who's interested in working with the Blank Experiment or any of the performers in the conference or in the workshop.
Yeah, no, these are great people that you will definitely want to get to know. My mission, yes, come learn from these people, but these are also people that could be potential collaborators, or, they are busy. Help you find someone else. It's going to be great networking.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to it. I will be in attendance and I will be taking all kinds of notes, and definitely asking all kinds of questions and stuff. Is that what the panel is? Is that like a...
Yeah, it'll be, so we'll have different people from the presenters on the panel. So it'll be 3 or 4 people. We'll have a couple of discussion points, and then, just be open for questions, people to, ask questions, pick our brains on some different topics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that is always such a, that's actually where you do start to get into the more collaborative stuff, at least within a workshop or some sort of webinar or lecture or whatever. And so you said there's 3 presentations a day, and it's 3 days long.
It's 3 days long. So it's May 19th through the 21st. So it's coming up. It's been a little crazy pulling it together, but we definitely hope to do this again, maybe do some, quarterly events, smaller events in the year between, the bigger events. Maybe we'll do it in person someday. It would be cool. But again, I do love the accessibility of virtual. I don't know. I feel like that's been a pandemic benefit, that it's kind of been normalized to do virtual events. Because I had my toddler who was born right before the pandemic hit. Everything moved virtual. There was so much stuff I was able to participate in that would have been a pain or probably impossible with like a 3-month-old baby.
Right.
No, it was just, I met so many people, through the pandemic on, New Music Twitter and everything. So I do love the accessibility of virtual. I hope that's something that continues. I want to continue it for sure.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest, yeah, like you said, it's one of the biggest silver linings.
I mean,
How,
in person's always better, but it's usually not a question of will I attend this virtual or in person. It's
Mhm.
usually a question of will I attend this virtual or not at all? Because the
Mhm.
in-person people will probably do it regardless. The virtual people, it's usually the only option they have in most cases.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, because no matter what, if it's in person, it has to take place at a very specific location. So like
Travel and
travel,
which is
lodging.
crazy expensive. It's inflation's here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Gas prices have been ridiculous. um, I think the virtual, it's been, yeah, like you said, it's been such a benefit for all of us. I mean, you and I, for example, we've never
Mhm.
actually met in
Right.
person.
Hopefully in
We
October for your concert. But
hopefully, fingers crossed, right? But we've had so many conversations and we've gotten to know each other pretty well.
mhm.
Um, and which is so exciting, and that's all because of this, because of the virtual experience
Right.
and ability to kind of just interact. So the timer went off. We've had a bumpy road of trying to
Zoom.
make this happen. So before we kind of close up here, are there any other things that we didn't touch upon that you want to mention, or perhaps like the application? Is there a deadline for the application to submit for the Toolbox sessions, or you said there were tiers, right? Are there?
Yeah, so we do have 2 tiers available. We have a general admission, which will just get you access to join the live sessions. And then we have the VIP, which is live sessions plus access to the library archives, simply because, it's going to take us time to get all that uploaded, build that library, create that access. So it is priced a little bit higher. We do have a student discount though. So if you are a student, let us know. We can get you that discount as well. But tickets are available on the website. You can register as late as the 19th, but it would probably be better to register a little bit sooner. But you can go ahead and register toolboxsessions.com. Be sure to follow our social media, sign up for our email list, because we're sending out all of those details that way as we get them figured out.
Fantastic. Yeah.
A
Well,
little
that's
last minute, but I'm
yeah.
learning this all too.
I think that's how most things are the first time
The
around.
first year is crazy, and then everything you figured out the first year applies to the second year, and then you make some tweaks, make some improvements. So it'll be
Yeah.
easier, but this year's a little nuts.
Right. And then the second year there's a host of all new like sort of not problems, but obstacles, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, this sounds so cool. I love that you're doing this. I can't wait to be in attendance.
And
What?
I'll just mention, we'll probably have the speakers that we have this year, we're probably going to have different people next year just to cover some different instruments, maybe some of the same people, but different topics. So you'll want to come this year and catch the people. We have some incredible people lined up.
the
I'm really honored that they're joining us.
the inaugural Toolbox Sessions
Yeah.
coming May 19th, 2022.
Yes.
Fantastic. So how can people reach out to you, your socials and website and all the good stuff?
Yeah. For Toolbox Sessions related stuff, I mean, you can reach out to me anywhere, but toolboxsessions.com or Toolbox Sessions. For me, my website's daniellekuntz.com, Kuntz. Then I'm on all the socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, a little bit of TikTok, but I also am not actually active on there. I just post stuff and then realize I have 20 comments, and when I log back in a month later, I'm that person. But yeah, find me on the socials, YouTube. Happy to, if you want to reach out, happy to chat, work with you, all of that.
And one final thing I want to mention too is that Danielle also offers consultation for composers in writing for harp.
Yep.
So any composers out there who want to get into the harp writing business, Danielle is your gal. Reach out to her, and she can help lead the way.
Oh yeah, and I do have a course that I'm launching in June, just to offer all that in a systematic way. That's going to be a little bit more accessible than getting 5 private lessons with me. So that will be coming soon if you want to sign up for my email list for updates.
Oh, hell yeah. I will personally sign up for that. Danielle, thank you so much. I think we did it.
Yay, we did it. Well, happy to come back anytime and hopefully Zoom will work a little bit better.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I hope so, right?
We'll find out soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here talking, and I can't wait for the Toolbox Sessions.
The same here. Thank you so much for having me.